I watched my parents open their home to ungrateful family for years. When I finally got a place of my own, they all came knocking, but this time, I showed them I've learned. We never lived alone. There were always voices, too many, footsteps that didn't belong to us, coats on chairs that weren't ours, noise. I remember being 9 and counting the toothbrushes in the bathroom. 7, we were 4. The rest came and went, an uncle between jobs, a cousin whose apartment flooded it didn't, a friend of my father's who just needed a week and stayed through 2 Thanksgivings. Some came with bags, others just with stories. All of them took up space. The living room wasn't a living room. It was a makeshift guest room, a mattress folded into a couch that no one was allowed to sit on because Uncle Stan's back was bad. The kitchen was never ours. My mother cooked for 12 even when we only had enough for 5. She watered down soup. She added rice to stretch meals. She gave without being asked. My father called it generosity. She called it family. I called it pressure. Even my birthday felt borrowed. My 12th, Aunt Cheryl's boyfriend's niece was in town. She got the last slice of cake. My mom whispered, "Don't be selfish, Nat." So I smiled, gave it up, said it didn't matter, but it did. Because even then, I understood what it meant to be the daughter who shrinks to make space. And I learned what it looks like when love gets confused with being a doormat. My room was never fully mine. Cousin Bree was supposed to stay for 2 weeks. That's what my mom said, setting up the air mattress while I folded my homework and stacked my books tighter into the corner of my desk. Just until she gets things sorted, they told me. 8 months later, she was still there. Her clothes took up half my closet. Her lotions lined the dresser we used to share. She played music late at night, said she couldn't sleep without background noise. I'd ask if she could turn it down once, twice, politely. The 3rd time, she rolled her eyes and said, "You're so uptight, Nat. Relax." I studied in the hallway sometimes, on the floor outside the bathroom, where the light didn't reach all the way but the noise was thinner. I kept my headphones in, not for music, just for silence. She borrowed my clothes without asking, laughed when I confronted her. "You don't even wear this stuff, right?" she said, tugging on a jacket she'd stretched out and left on the floor. I told my parents once, said I needed my room back. My dad sighed. My mom said, "She's family, Natalie, where's your compassion?" I remember swallowing it down, every ounce of frustration, because no one in that house had time to validate the quiet kind of resentment. The simmering kind. The kind you start collecting young, until one day it turns into a vow. One I'd whisper into my pillow, late at night, while Bree snored beside me with no shame. When I get out of here, nobody's ever going to make me feel like a guest in my own home again. Aunt Cheryl called my mom's food bland, then asked for seconds. She always came over loud, perfume thick, opinions thicker. She'd kiss both my cheeks like we were close and say things like, "This house still has that same smell," like boiled things. Then she'd sit at the table, uninvited, and pick at whatever my mom made. "You still don't use garlic?" she asked one night, spooning more rice onto her plate. "Girl, you gotta stop being scared of seasoning." I watched my mom smile, not the happy kind, the clenched kind. She said I used bouillon cubes. Cheryl snorted, "Of course you did." And then she kept eating. That was the rhythm. Mock, take, repeat. She'd insult the curtains, the couch, the size of the fridge, then help herself to leftovers and leave with a Tupperware full of the same bland stew she pretended to gag over. Once I offered her hot sauce from the fridge, thinking I was helping. She looked at me like I was the help. "Mind your manners, baby. Grown folks are talking." My parents said nothing, just laughed it off like the joke wasn't layered in disrespect. After she left, I asked my mom, "Why does she keep coming?" "She's my sister," she said, rinsing plates that weren't ours. That's what family does. But I didn't believe her, because I knew what family was supposed to feel like. And whatever that was, it didn't feel like love, it felt like a tax. Uncle Stan lived rent-free for 2 years. No job, no plan, no thanks. He arrived with 2 duffel bags and a pack of off-brand cigarettes, said he'd just split from his girl and needed a place to breathe. My dad cleared out the den, put a padlock on the liquor cabinet, gave up his own reading chair. Stan took it all like it was owed to him. He smoked on the porch, tracked ash into the kitchen, and always, Left just enough cereal in the box that it looked full but wasn't even enough for a bowl. When I asked him once if he could help clean the gutters, he said, "That's man's work, kiddo, ask your pops." But I saw him bragging online. Facebook posts like, "Back on my feet. Big things coming." Meanwhile, it was my dad under the car in the driveway, replacing a starter for Stan's '98 Altima. It was my mom buying extra groceries, stretching her hours at work. Stan borrowed money, never paid it back. Laughed loud, slapped backs, told stories about his hustle. One time I heard him say, "No one rides for you like family." I wanted to scream, because riding doesn't mean draining. Doesn't mean taking until there's nothing left and then blaming the people who gave it. But no one said anything, because he was just going through something. Because he'll figure it out. Because my parents couldn't find the language for no. But I was learning it, quietly, word by word. My parents called it love, I called it exhaustion. They said, family is family, like that explained everything. Like that covered rent. Like that justified every insult swallowed, every boundary erased in the name of loyalty. I watched my mom cook with a headache. Watched my dad hand over his last $100 like it was a reflex. Watched our house shrink around us, not physically, but spiritually. Like every new guest carved out another piece of peace we never got back. They said it with pride. We take care of our own. Even when our own left dishes in the sink, stole from their wallets, mocked the paint on the walls and said things like, "Y'all still haven't upgraded this old place." I'd see it on their faces sometimes, in between the smiles. In the way my mom stood just a little longer at the stove, shoulders sinking. The way my dad lingered in the driveway after work, sitting in the car long after the engine cut. They looked like people who loved everyone else before themselves. And no one ever thanked them for it. Not really. Love in that house was a transaction, an expectation. A worn path of sacrifice passed down like furniture no one liked but couldn't throw out, and they never fought back. So I started learning how to, not with shouting, but with plans. I studied in the hallway some nights. Bree liked to nap with music on loud, pulsing lyrics that bled through the drywall like they had something to prove. She said it helped her rest her mind. Said I was being dramatic when I asked her to turn it down. "You can read anywhere," she said, rolling over. "Be flexible." So I was. I sat outside my own bedroom, back against the wall, textbook on my knees, highlighter clenched in my teeth. The hallway light flickered every so often. I learned to time my reading between the blinks. Sometimes I used the bathroom floor. It had better lighting. Less noise. Nobody noticed. Nobody asked why the girl with a 4.0 was finishing her science project on the edge of a tile mat or scribbling notes while crouched between the washer and the dryer. I did what I had to do, that's what they taught me. But even then, I knew it was wrong. That surviving shouldn't feel like hiding. That needing quiet wasn't arrogance. That claiming space wasn't disrespect. I told myself, this is temporary. But temporary doesn't heal what it hardens. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more invisible I became, until the only time anyone saw me was when I took up too much space. So I learned to take up none. Until I couldn't take it anymore. Diddy called me too proud. I was 16. Sitting in the living room, earbuds in, a book open on my lap, not schoolwork, just something I actually wanted to read. I remember the way she looked at me, like my posture offended her. "You always think you're better than everybody," she said, loud enough for the room. Sitting there like a princess. I didn't look up, she laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. That's how they said it, always dressed in laughter, inside comments, in whispers that wanted to be heard, too quiet, too proud, too good for the rest of us. It wasn't that I talked back, I didn't. It wasn't that I made demands, I never did. But I had dreams, I asked for time, I wanted space. And somehow in that house that translated to ego. Because if you weren't bending, you were bragging. If you weren't shrinking, you were shaming. It took me years to realize their jokes weren't jokes. They were attempts to break what they couldn't understand, to smudge what they couldn't own, to pull me back into a version of myself that never made them feel small. But I wasn't playing that part anymore. And one day, they'd find out just how proud I'd become. The final straw was the closet fight. It wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no door slamming. Just quiet violence, the kind that cuts sharper than volume ever could. I'd folded my laundry, stacked it neatly on the bed. I opened the closet to hang my shirts, and there it was, Bree's new pile. Shoes kicked into the back corner. A purse balanced on my top shelf. Hangers bent from weight that wasn't mine. I stood there for a second, didn't even move. She walked in behind me, looked over my shoulder, and said, "This space looks better without your stuff anyway." No smirk, no humor, just cold. I didn't say a word, not because I didn't have one, but because I knew right then that I was done. I took my stack of clothes, folded it again, carried it back into the hallway. She said something behind me. I didn't hear it, because I was already packing a different kind of suitcase in my head. The mental kind, the exit strategy kind, the one with no more excuses written on every zipper. I laid in bed that night, lights off, counting down the months until I could leave. I made a list in my head: get a job, save every cent, get out, lock the door behind you, because it wasn't just about Bree. It was about every time someone stepped over my boundaries and called it love. I wasn't going to let it happen again. I swore I'd get out, and keep everyone out with me. The next morning, I applied for 2 retail jobs before school. After class, I asked about scholarships, took on extra credits, found a weekend shift at a bookstore an hour away, and lied about how far it was just to avoid questions. I saved birthday money, tutored kids who didn't want to learn, skipped movies, skipped shoes, skipped sleep. Every dollar was a brick. Every shift, another nail in the door I was building to shut it all out. By 24, I was in a 1-bedroom with thin walls and neighbors who argued like clockwork. But it was mine. And when I finally turned 27, when the math added up and the bank balance held steady, I signed the lease on a 3-bedroom apartment with sunlight that flooded the living room at noon and a kitchen that didn't smell like someone else's reheated choices. Alone, no house guests, no voices, just key in hand, new locks, clean floors, and the kind of quiet I used to think only existed in books. I stood in the middle of the empty space that first night and didn't cry. I smiled. Because it wasn't just a home, it was a line drawn in hardwood and paint. It said, "Not this time, not ever again." The apartment was bright and quiet. No footsteps but mine, no secondhand smoke drifting under the door, no forced conversations over cold coffee, just light, air, and space that didn't carry anyone else's energy. I cooked barefoot for the first time in years, left books face down on the couch, let the dishes sit overnight without guilt, took showers with the door open and music blasting because no one was there to mock my playlist. It wasn't fancy. The walls were thin and the stove had a quirk where the front burner never stayed level, but it was mine. Entirely. Completely. No shared corners. No tension creeping out from under the floorboards. I lit candles without someone saying they triggered a headache. Opened windows just because I liked the breeze. Walked around in old college sweatshirts and didn't have to explain who I was trying to impress. For once, rest didn't feel like rebellion. It felt earned. The silence didn't scare me. It healed me. I had space to think, to stretch, to exist without compromise. And in that stillness, I made a promise to myself: this place will never carry what the last one did. Because peace isn't just a feeling, it's a standard. And now I had both. One room for guests, but not for family. I set it up with intention: soft sheets, clean towels, a small side table with a lamp that glowed warm instead of harsh. A space for friends, real guests, people who'd respect the walls they walked into. I didn't fill it with inherited obligation. No framed photos of cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. No childhood mementos from the house I left behind. Just peace. Simplicity. A door that stayed closed unless I opened it. The closet was empty on purpose, because guests don't move in. They visit, they thank you, they leave. And if they don't understand that, they don't come at all. That's what this room was, not an invitation, a boundary. A visible, physical line between who I used to be and who I was becoming. I'd watched too many people walk through my parents' door and treat it like a free ride. Call it love while draining every ounce of stability they had. Call it closeness while rolling their eyes at the sacrifices made to keep the lights on. That wasn't going to happen here. This wasn't just a spare room. It was a declaration. You don't get to weaponize family to get what you want. Not anymore. Then Diddy called. "Hey, stranger," she started, too sweet, too casual. "I was just thinking about you. I heard you got a new place, congrats, it must be nice, huh?" I knew what was coming. She didn't even wait 5 minutes. "I'm in a bit of a bind," she said. "Nothing crazy, just a few months tops, until I find a job and get on my feet again." That phrase, "just until I get on my feet," was a classic. A family favorite. It never meant weeks. It meant indefinite. I held the phone to my ear and watched the steam curl from the tea I'd made. I didn't owe her this. I didn't owe anyone this, so I said it. Calmly, like I'd practiced. "No." Silence, "Excuse me. I'm not opening my home up for that. I hope things work out, but no." Her tone snapped tight. "Wow, so that's who you are now." I didn't answer. Later that night, she sent a text. Just one line. "Must be nice to forget where you came from." I didn't reply, because I didn't forget. I remembered everything. That's exactly why I said no. Then came Uncle Stan. He didn't call, he showed up. In the lobby of my building, all confidence and cologne, waving at the receptionist like he was a regular. I spotted him through the glass door before he saw me. He grinned. "Hey, kiddo. Heard you got yourself a grown-up spot." I stepped out to meet him, didn't invite him in. He went straight to it. "Look, I won't beat around the bush. Your parents never said no to me, so I figured, why not ask the golden girl? Just a few nights, that's all." I looked him in the eye. "I'm not my parents." He blinked, smiled like he didn't hear me. "Come on now, Nat, don't be like that, we're blood. And that's all we are." He dropped the charm fast. "You always were the cold one." I didn't flinch. "You always were the entitled one." He scoffed, called me selfish, said I'd changed. I didn't disagree. I turned around, walked back inside, and told the front desk to never let him in again. Blocked his number that night, because boundaries don't have to be bitter, they just have to be clear. And mine were solid. Aunt Cheryl sent a voice note, not a call, not a text. A voice note, 1 minute and 42 seconds of passive-aggressive syrup poured over expectation. "I don't even need a full room," she said, tone breezy. "Just floor space, sweetheart. I've got my own blanket and everything." "You can't spare that." She paused like she expected me to laugh, like she'd already decided I would say yes, because that's what good girls do. Because I'd been raised to feel guilty before I ever felt grounded. "I mean, we opened our doors to your mom so many times growing up," she added, softening her voice. "I just thought, well, maybe it's your turn now." My turn, like boundaries were a baton to be passed down. Like silence was a virtue. I listened to the whole thing once. Didn't respond, deleted it, no call, no explanation, just space, maintained. I turned my phone off that night, lit a candle, opened a window, let the silence take shape around me. Because peace isn't just what you create, it's what you protect. And mine was staying untouched. My mom called me quietly, not to scold me, not directly, just to say she heard. "They're saying you're cold," she said, voice soft like she hoped I wouldn't get defensive. "That you've changed, that you've forgotten how we grew up." I sat on the floor of my living room, legs crossed, tea untouched. My mom's voice was always the hardest to hear like this, thin, stretched between guilt and loyalty. She didn't say I was wrong, but she didn't say they were either. Just this. "Are you sure, Natalie?" I closed my eyes, took a breath, felt the quiet around me like armor. "I'm sure," I said. She didn't argue, she just exhaled. The kind of sound that carries more history than breath. Then said, "Okay," and hung up. No lecture, no comfort, just space. Maybe she understood, maybe she didn't. But I wasn't doing this to be understood. I was doing it to survive. I got labeled the difficult one. And I wore it proudly. At the next family gathering, I walked in with my own food and my own ride. I smiled when spoken to, answered when asked, and left when I was ready, not when it was expected. They whispered, of course. Diddy gave me a once-over and said, "You always look so busy." Uncle Stan made a joke about me writing people off, like she's famous now. Bree barely looked up from her phone, but her laugh was sharp when I passed by. I didn't flinch. They could dress their resentment in whatever tone they liked. They could call it pride, call it distance, call it cold. But none of them were carrying what I'd carried. None of them had given up their bed for someone else's chaos, or studied in the hallway while being told they were too much for asking for quiet. So yes, I was difficult. Difficult to manipulate, difficult to guilt, difficult to pull back into a system that fed on self-sacrifice and called it love. I didn't yell, didn't explain, didn't defend, I just sipped my drink, checked the time, and left early, because peace isn't something I stay late to lose. Bree posted a rant, a blurry photo of a wine glass and a caption that dripped with bitterness. Some people forget where they came from, can't even return a fraction of what they were given. But hey, boundaries, right? No names. But it didn't need any. The likes trickled in, mostly the same cousins who'd smirked at me at family dinners, the ones who never asked how I was unless they needed something. I didn't comment, didn't text, didn't respond, because their shame only echoes where silence won't stand. And mine stood firm. A few days later, Megan, my cousin on the other side, the one with a quiet streak and eyes that always understood too much, sent me a DM. I saw Bree's post. Just wanted to say, I get it. And I'm proud of you. I stared at the message for a long time, because even though I didn't need validation, part of me still remembered being the kid in the hallway, wondering if anyone would ever notice the girl behind the curtain. Someone had, and that was enough. Let them post. Let them whisper. I wasn't theirs to guilt anymore. My dad visited alone one afternoon, no warning, just a knock, soft, almost apologetic. I opened the door and there he was, standing with his hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't bring a plate, didn't ask for anything. Just walked in and stood in the middle of my living room like he didn't want to sit without permission. "It's quiet here," he said after a while. I offered him tea. He declined. Sat anyway. We didn't talk about the texts, or the calls, or the things they'd said about me in group chats I was no longer a part of. He looked around, touched the arm of the couch. Noticed the books stacked in the corner, the candle still burning on the shelf. Then he said it. "You were right." I blinked. He didn't look at me when he said it, just stared out the window. I didn't want to admit it, but this, he motioned to the stillness, the simplicity. "You did what your mother and I never could. You protected your space." He smiled small. "Tired, I miss the quiet. I just didn't know that's what I was missing." I didn't cry until he left. But when the door closed behind him, I sat on the floor and let the silence hold me like it always had. This was more than a home. It was proof. They call it cold. I call it recovery. From years of being stretched thin to make room for other people's comfort. From dinners where I was invisible. From closets that didn't hold my clothes. From expectations that choked like hands and never loosened, even when I begged with silence. This wasn't rebellion. It was repair. Every no I say now is a thread in the stitching of my own peace. Every door I don't open is a boundary I was never taught to hold. Every text I ignore, every guilt trip I let crash without response, is me refusing to inherit the exhaustion my parents wore like skin. They gave everything, and no one gave it back. I'm not bitter. I'm just not broken enough to call dysfunction love. If they call that selfish, fine, let them, because I'm building something else. Something that won't collapse when someone shows up uninvited. Something that breathes, something that lasts, and maybe they'll never understand. But I wasn't built for their understanding. I was built to end what broke us. My door stays closed to chaos, and wide open to peace. That's the difference now. There's no war inside me when I hear the knock. I don't jump, I don't flinch, I don't shrink, because I know who's welcome and who's not. I light a candle every evening. Lavender or cedarwood, depending on the mood. I read books and leave them half-finished if I want. I water the plants when I remember. Sometimes I forget, and that's okay too. There's no one here to judge, no one here to take, just me. And the life I built from every never again, I whispered in the dark as a teenager while the house rattled with someone else's bad decisions. They can say I'm cold. Call me prideful, say I've changed. They're right. I've changed everything. This silence, this safety, it used to be a dream. Now it's mine, earned, kept, protected. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I love you all.